I'll try and do my best to make sure that this is as interactive as possible, and and hopefully you will all go back, with some useful insights on how the law interacts with impact investing, and what are the different forms of investments that are available for social enterprises in the market today. So this is basically, I think Mridula has already given you a very quick overview, but the agenda is just to understand what's all the fuss about impact investments, and to explore how the market for impact investments has evolved from traditional philanthropy to evidence-based giving to financially motivated investments and instruments, to then moving into what is known as socially responsible investments, and then actually moving into more nuanced forms of what we would call as socially sustainable investments, either through social and development impact bonds or social success notes. Towards the end, at the end of after we've gone through the basics of each of these forms of investment, the idea would be for you to have a basic understanding of what's the best option for your organization, and also to give you with to leave you with certain insights on what are some of the recent developments around, more contemporary developments around impact investment in India as well. So that's where that's broadly what we're looking to cover in the next 1 hour. So what's all the fuss about? Some may say that, and I'm sure you've heard from other speakers over the last 2 days, you probably may have heard some terms, on a very regular basis as well. But I think at a very conceptual level, social impact investing brings together two concepts, one of financial investment and return, and the other of greater common good. And I think like we understand a traditional marriage, there are always tensions between both, between both of these concepts as well. How do you achieve a balance between financial investment and return, while also being, while also striving for what is known as the greater common good? And I think I don't need to repeat what may have already been said over the last 2 days, but this pandemic has brought into focus social impact and sustainable investing like never before. And you suddenly see social entrepreneurs, impact investors, and social capital being all over the news, and being glaringly, being in the glare of the mainstream investment market, as well as the media as well. So much so that many of the impact investors have predicted that impact investment will soon be the mainstream. So it's therefore very, very, it is imperative for all social entrepreneurs, whether they are for-profit entities or not-for-profit entities, to understand the concepts around impact investment from a structural and from a legal perspective, as much as they would do so from a commercial perspective as well. So at a very basic level, all forms of investments have two principal actors. There may be other actors as well, including intermediaries such as law firms and lawyers as well. But but the two principal actors in an impact investment transaction would be investors and investee organizations. Now, when we say investors in the context of not-for-profit entities, the investors would typically be foundations, whereas there could also be governmental support, and there could be certain amount of support from sovereign funds or international development organizations flowing into not-for-profit entities. On the other hand, when you refer to investors in the context of private for-profit entities, we're typically looking at social impact funds, high net worth individuals, large foundations who have also now started to make equity-based investments in for-profit entities, and angel investors who invest in any for-profit entity, but in this particular case, they've consciously chosen to make an investment in an impact enterprise. The other stakeholders, depending on what kind of instrument we're looking at, depending on what form of investment we're looking at, can be monitoring and evaluation service providers, other advisory organizations. They could be impact consulting firms. There are educational and research organizations. In each different sector, you would have sector-specific intermediaries and experts who would play a key role in either, at some point in time during the life cycle of an investment. That's just to, give you a basic introduction, and now as we go into the subsequent slides, we'll try and understand who the investors are and who the investee entities are in each different form of investment. This was basically to introduce you to the basic concepts. So this the purpose of this slide. Right. And as we go through this, you'll also understand that the manner in which I've tried to structure this session has also been to possibly walk you through the way impact investment as a term has evolved from several years ago to what it is now. And so while today it may be cool to talk about impact investments, the fact of the matter is there have been forms of impact investment that have been available to not-for-profit entities from quite some time. It's difficult to put a year to it, but traditional philanthropy has existed since time immemorial. What's the key characteristics of traditional philanthropy? There's no expectation of a financial return, but the focus of the grantor is to create social impact on identified communities, areas, sectors. The grantor could be a private foundation, it could be a charitable organization like UNICEF, it could be family offices, it could be high net worth individuals, and it could be a whole the whole set of private foundations that have come to dominate the not-for-profit landscape. In the context of traditional philanthropy, the investee entity is a grantee. These are typically not-for-profit entities. So the idea behind traditional philanthropy is that the person who's receiving the funds from the grantor must be a not-for-profit entity, i.e. that there should be no profit motive involved in the running of an organization, that the members of that organization are not entitled to participate in any surplus that may be generated by the organization in the course of its activities. So typically, in legal forms, you'll find them in trusts, you'll find them in societies and Section 8 companies under Indian law. In recent times, obviously, Indian company law has evolved. India was the first country to mandate corporate social responsibility as a statutory obligation. Of course, it was mandated for organizations that met certain basic thresholds. The 500 crore turnover threshold or the 5 crore profitability threshold was imposed in the Companies Act 2013. So CSR grants made by companies are also brought within the purview of traditional philanthropy. How is traditional philanthropy documented? It's typically documented through a basic grant agreement. The grant agreement outlines the details of the project for which the grant is being made, the expectation of the impact that the grantor has from the grantee organization, the duration for which the project has to be, the project will run and the project will be financed, and certain milestones that the grantee organization would be required to meet from time to time. The applicable laws that govern traditional philanthropy would be, firstly, you would need to have an understanding of all laws that govern the formation of not-for-profit entities. So if you're a trust, you need to have an idea of the Trust Act and what uh, the law entails as regards the management of trusts. If you're a society, you need to understand what is the law on societies. And if you're a Section 8 company, you obviously need to understand the obligations of a Section 8 company under the provisions of the Companies Act 2013. Where the grantor is an entity that is situated outside India, that's where the FCRA, or the Foreign Contribution Regulation Act 2010, kicks in. And as many of you may be aware, this legislation has detailed registration and compliance requirements, both on the grantee as well as the grantor. They need to satisfy very stringent conditions before the grant can be received by an organization in India. So, we can actually discuss each of these forms of investment till the cows come home. But because we're obviously doing this within a 60-minute time period, I've tried to compress the concepts around each form of investment, so we can actually cover each form of investment. And maybe if you have specific questions on each form of investment, you can hold them back till the end of the presentation. And as soon as the presentation ends, I can walk you through. I can take any questions on each form of investment as well. So while traditional philanthropy, it was the most basic form of impact investment, there were certain challenges around, how grant money was typically utilized. And because of the fact that, typically there was poor oversight on grantee organizations, as the markets evolved, the form of grant making also evolved towards what is known as evidence-based giving. And the key characteristic of evidence-based giving was that they introduced a condition to a grantee organization to demonstrate a proof of impact before the grantor would actually be able to fund those grantee organizations. Now, this typically in evidence-based giving, the grantors are typically governments or government-funded organizations. The reason for requiring proof of impact is clear in the situation where the government is actually taking taxpayer money and granting and disbursing them as grants to organizations. Because of the level of accountability that is expected, obviously these conditions were introduced as well. In the case of grants, often a grant dispersal could, it can also be tranched, so that each subsequent tranche would be conditional on the grantee organization being able to meet specific conditions, and after actually providing delivery of the evidence of impact, the second or the subsequent tranche would be made by the grantor organization to the grantee. What are the benefits of this? This actually allows for social innovation. It incentivizes social innovation. It provides an opportunity for grantors and grantees to engage in targeted giving, and obviously target. And for a grantee, there's a huge amount of discipline involved in being able to prove impact. And so therefore, this is a beneficial form of, philanthropy that can be accessed by different organizations. The criticism, though, has been that the data that has been typically relied on by grantor organizations to demonstrate whether there's been impact or not has been largely of poor quality. And in most cases, impact is very difficult to measure. And so therefore that's been the criticism associated with evidence giving. Since we are discussing legalities involved in evidence giving, evidence-based giving, it's not very different from traditional philanthropy. So you just, if you were looking at what laws would apply, it would be similar to those laws that would apply to traditional philanthropy. So obviously, while philanthropy was probably one form of impact investment, organizations, realize that the scope for impact would be limited because of the fact that in many cases there was no motivation, because of the fact that internal stakeholders would not be able to derive would not be able to derive any financial return. Consequently, the market evolved to trying to introduce the concept of financially motivated investments in social organizations. Obviously, in the case of financially motivated investments, the key characteristics are that the focus is equally on both financial return and social impact. The investor would typically expect market or above market rate of return. Investors who typically make financially motivated investments are venture capital funds, seed funds, private equity investors, and large corporates. And investees who receive financially motivated investments would be for-profit entities operating in sectors that can have a positive social impact. They receive these funds as equity. They receive these funds as consideration for granting equity to those investors in their organizations. If not equity, it could be a debt investment where the organization undertakes to repay the debt, with a certain amount of interest. And there could be certain hybrid instruments which have both an equity and a debt. It's a quasi-equity, quasi-debt nature as well. The focus on social responsibility arises or rather stems from the themes that investee organizations choose to operate in. So whether it's education, healthcare, renewable energy, microfinance, these are themes these are thematic investments. And you can have impact investments of all kinds across these themes. So you can have a grant in an educational organization. You can have a financially motivated investment in an educational organization. You could have a social impact bond in an educational being issued by a educational organization. And you could have a traditional equity-based investment as well. So that's what we're really looking at is it's just one form of distinguishing a social impact investment from what would be a typically just a for-profit investment in sectors that have no regard to the environment that we operate in. So for instance, if you are in a conventional equity investment in a business that does not emphasize social impact, then that's just part of the mainstream venture capital investment framework. However, when you actually get into the legality of financially motivated investments, it's pretty similar to what would the legal lens that one would apply to conventional equity-based investments. So the investment agreement would typically stipulate the nature of the instrument that is issued by the company to the investor, what are the rights available to investors, what is the expected rate of return that investors seek, and what are the forms of exit that are available to an investor. The laws that are typically applicable in such scenarios would be the Companies Act, because the investee organization would typically be a for-profit company. If the investor is a foreign venture capital fund, then typically you would also need to have an understanding of the laws governing foreign direct investment in India, which is contained in the Foreign Exchange Management Act 1999, and the rules framed by the Reserve Bank of India from time to time. What are some of, okay, and moving on, the second form of equity-based investments is what is known as socially responsible investments. Now, the difference between a socially responsible investment and financially motivated investment is that here the investor prioritizes social impact, is willing to make a financial trade-off, and is willing to accept market or below market returns in order for the investee organization to achieve the desired social impact. It's viewed as being value additive. Certain socially responsible investments, however, have outperformed traditional investments by 8 to 11%. Now, the investors typically in these kind of investments are venture capital funds, pension funds, wealthy individuals, family offices, foundations, whereas the issuers of instruments for socially responsible investments could be private corporations, but they could also be public sector utilities, as you will find out in subsequent slides as well. But I think the key distinction here is that with socially responsible investments, there is a clear focus on socially responsible on the theme of social responsibility. Responsible investing also applies a negative screen on harmful products such as alcohol, tobacco, firearms, fossil fuels, and they may include a consideration of a broader range of factors from a risk management perspective. So, for example, the screen that would be applied would be an investor will choose not to invest in any organization that has any linkage to child labor in its value chain, that possibly emits a range of pollutants as part of its business activity. So that's the concept of socially responsible investing. An offshoot of socially responsible investing, or the next degree of socially responsible investing, is sustainable investing, which takes impact considerations to the next level. It applies a positive screen and selects investments based on, proactive, positive ESG factors, environmental, social, and governance factors as well. So that's really these are basically how you move from the lower end of the impact spectrum to the higher end of the impact spectrum. So because of the fact that there is a greater amount of capital that is available for equity-based investments, and I think there was a study done recently on how much money is invested in private markets versus how much money is devoted to philanthropy. And there was a huge disparity between the two, with obviously equity investments, being far, the availability of equity capital being, in greater abundance than philanthropic capital. And so because of that, as you can see, when you move from the lower end of the impact spectrum to the higher end of the impact spectrum, there are two things that emerge. One is the nature of the investment begins to change. So from a grant where there's no expectation of a financial return to actually looking at financially motivated investments where the impact considerations are not as significant, to actually moving to sustainable investing where they're actually prioritizing impact considerations. You can see a change in the kind of impact that capital can potentially have on the organizations that are able to demonstrate that kind of impact. Yeah, who are some of the other stakeholders involved? So obviously, with different kinds of socially responsible investment instruments come along with it comes the responsibility of actually being able to monitor and evaluate impact. Because if the impact cannot be monitored or evaluated uh, based on objective factors, then there's the potential for capital to actually, huge amounts of capital to actually go wasted. Uh, so what are some of the other, who are some of the, so obviously this is where the role of intermediaries such as monitoring and evaluation agencies who actually measure impact come in. You also have impact measurement metrics. We'll discuss that in subsequent slide as well. And as you can, as we'll also see in the subsequent slides, the world is moving towards an impact investment ecosystem where there's actually an emphasis on devising objective impact investment metrics. Of course, it's a challenge to arrive at one universally applicable impact investment metric, but the very fact that the discussion today centers around what is the impact, what is the manner in which impact investment can be measured. Uh, it obviously places a significant obligation and onus on the social entrepreneur or the enterprise that is receiving money to demonstrate that it has been able to have a particular kind of impact. These impact measurement metrics are outlined in an investment agreement. And again, the laws that apply to investment agreements in a socially responsible investment or a sustainable investment would also be similar to the laws that apply to financially motivated investments. Yeah, so these have, so I mean, grant and equity. So obviously, they're two ends of the spectrum. Now, when you go back to looking at the way legal systems have evolved both in India and across the world, traditionally there were just two. There were two kinds of investments. Either you were considered as a for-profit investor, or you were considered as a philanthropic investor, and never would the twain meet, right? And so there's always been the tension between being a for-profit entity or a not-for-profit entity. However, in the last 2 decades, the world has moved, and there've been a number of financial innovations that have started to emerge, which actually recognize the role that both for-profit entities and not-for-profit entities can play in catalyzing social impact. And that's where the next part of my presentation focuses on investments that are typically what are known as blended finance. They have an element of philanthropy. They also have an element of providing providing a risk investor with market-based returns. And that's why the blend, the manner in which the manner in which regulators across the world have been, regulators, investors, and entities across the world have been able to devise these instruments tells you that there is still scope for further innovation. And obviously, the world need not be seen in a binary where you're either making a for-profit, financially motivated investment, or you're really looking to forego the financial return and just make a charitable donation. So that the world, there's an increasing realization that it need not be either one or two. It could be a mix of both of these two. So I think the first innovation in that regard was that of social impact bonds. The first social impact bond was issued only 10 years ago. So I think one needs to be cognizant of the fact that we are, in relative terms, in a very, very new territory. And I think, and I'm talking about the global experience here. If you actually apply that experience to India, then we are in almost, literally a greenfield territory where there have been very few experiences with social impact bonds and development impact bonds. I know you had a masterclass earlier on SIBs and DIBs, But I think I'm just trying to sum up here. Um, in total, there have been 142 SIBs and 9 DIBs globally as of May 2019. And I think the statistics pointed out that a total of 420 million odd has been raised through these bonds. The key characteristics of both SIBs and DIBs, and also social success notes, which I will discuss towards the end, is that of a pay for performance model, and also that of spreading of risk across a risk investor and an outcome funder. So I've actually, also just outlined there's on the right side of my screen, there's actually an image which just depicts the typical structure of a social impact bond. The only thing that changes is the outcome funder in a social impact bond is a government or a government body, whereas in a development impact bond, that could be a private organization, which could very well be a foundation, or it could also be like an impact investor that's actually making the outcome payment. So typically, it's so the way it works is, the investor provides funding. Typically, these investors be foundations or consortiums of charitable organizations. The service provider is typically a not-for-profit entity who implements a particular project. So as you can see on the right side, you have the service provider providing services to a class of the population that is in need of those services. You then have actually an evaluator who evaluates what kind of impact has the provision of those services had on that particular population. And assuming certain conditions have been met by the enterprise that's providing the services, then you actually have the government saying, we'll incentivize the organization that's actually provided the services by taking on the responsibility to pay the investor who invested in that organization in the first place. So it's a circular diagram that you see at the end. And the government only decides to make the payment when there is an independent evaluation done by a monitoring and evaluation agency that assesses project milestones with a view towards signaling fund inflows to impact investors who've taken the risk in funding the enterprise right at the inception as well. So typically how impact bonds operate from a legal and structural standpoint is that there's a tripartite agreement between the investor, the outcome funder, the NGO. So what happens there is that, so the pay for performance model is built into the tripartite agreement, with the outcome funder agreeing to pay on the basis of an evaluation done by a monitoring and evaluation agency. The benefits for this is that, like I said, it incentivizes public-private partnerships. It encourages collaborations between for-profit entities and not-for-profit entities. These are suited for long-term projects. They're also which may also be unsuitable for other kinds of impact investments where investors are looking to cash out within a 2-year or a 3-year time period. And it provides funding upfront to non-governmental organizations. So far, so good. But there's also been a fair share of criticism coming the way of social impact bonds. In fact, while preparing for this presentation, I actually came across, the fact that there had been so last year, there was actually a film that was made on the social impact bond experience in USA and Canada. And I think, the person who also made the film wrote an article, in the Stanford Social Innovation Review, where I think they described the fact that the actual net number of beneficiaries on an average of a social impact bond has been less than 500 individuals. So that was a staggering amount, considering staggeringly low amount considering the amount of investments that have already flown, that have already gone into SIBs and DIBs in the last 10 years. And I think the perspective that was also provided was a question that seemed to emerge from this was, were we really commoditizing citizens? And were we monitoring what services citizens actually need to utilize for investments to be made in particular kinds of projects? So, for example, if there was no consumption by a particular population in need, if the project was not such that required a huge level of impact investment in there, would there be any upliftment of those societies by impact investors? But because of the fact that you're commoditizing them and you're looking for some kind of a return, this was the criticism that was leveled against the entire process of SIBs and DIBs. Well, I'm not really sure what to make of that, but the point is that given the fact that if there's I think the solution to the fact that only 400, if an SIB has only been able to touch the lives of 400 or 500 beneficiaries on an average, then the solution would be to better target the SIBs, better identify the projects that are involved, and make sure that that average number goes up significantly higher. I wouldn't therefore discard social impact bonds or development impact bonds altogether, because I think there is something to be said about having access to government funds, and also bringing the government and governmental organizations into play in looking at urgent social problems as well. I think in this regard, there's also been another innovation which was actually launched by the Yunus Social Business Fund. I know that I think one of your prior speakers was actually from YSBF. So it's actually an adaptation of the social impact and development impact bond. And the only difference here being the social enterprise in question need not necessarily be just a trust or a society or a not-for-profit organization. It could very well be even a for-profit entity as well. The other key difference is, in a social success note, it actually initially the investment is made in the form of a working capital loan. The outcome funder actually pays back the expected rate of return to the lender in the event that the impact metrics have been met. So the outcome payer here could be foundations or charitable organizations. And like in a case of an SIB or a DIB, you have a monitoring and evaluation services agency, and you have other intermediaries such as legal service providers and sector-specific intermediaries to assist with due diligence as well. Yeah, I think again here, the benefits are, it also enables a more effective use of donor capital, because even foundations who are charitable foundations can become outcome funders, and they will only become outcome funders when they know that certain charitable objectives have already been met, or certain impact objectives have already been met. This enables access to funds for unattractive or undeserved sectors, which was what I was trying to allude to in the context of the previous slides. The laws that apply to a social success note would typically be the Companies Act and the ECB regulations, or the External Commercial Borrowing Regulations, where the lender is a an entity that is situated outside India. Yeah, so, as much as possible over the last 30 to 40 minutes, I've been able to run through this in some amount of very, very basic detail. So the question at the end of this is, what's the best option for me or for my organization? That really depends on one, the nature of legal entity. Are you a private company? Are you a Section 8? Are you a trust or are you a society? So you, depending on what kind of an entity you are, you have access to all the different kinds of funds that we discussed in the previous slides. And I think, as I tried to explain very, very, very briefly in the context of each slide, the regulatory regime for each different kind of entity and each different source of funds would differ. It also depends on the kind of social impact the social enterprise is intending to create. Who are the intended beneficiaries? What is the kind of alignment to environmental environmental, social, and governance standards, or the UN Sustainable Development Goals as well. How long is the project for? Is it a long-term project? Is it a medium-term project? What if you are typically attracting investors who want financial returns, and then if you are in a position to generate financial returns, you may be willing to raise equity from a whole host of impact investment funds that are out there in the Indian market now. And if you are also willing to partner with the government, then you could also be looking at instruments like the social impact bonds or development impact bonds as well. And yeah, and if we, if social impact bonds, DIBs, and social success notes have been recent innovations, there's more innovation coming your way. There are rules and regulations around crowdfunding, that would probably be in place, in the near future. Employee matching programs, and then you also have the concept of the social stock exchange, which has been in the news in the last few months. It's proposed to be regulated by the SEBI. You can list, instruments issued by both for-profit entities and not-for-profit entities. The intention is to create a marketplace for social capital. And like I said, the underlying theme, across all forms of investment is that there's a greater expectation that any kind of impact be measured in an objective manner. And now you can see that there are impact measurement tools that are arising from various organizations in the ecosystem. And I've just given a few examples from a few organizations that have actually come up with impact measurement tools and scorecards.